was a meeting in Steve Lipstein's office that Dr. Danforth invited the principals to. And at that first meeting, we laid out the concept for what has become an innovation district, and referenced what we had heard in Boston. And obviously the key principals there were the chancellors of the universities who had just heard that this made money. Didn't just achieve a civic benefit, it made money, and it was responsible investing on their part. And the proposition that Dr. Danforth put forward was we need to do a little more research. We need to do some physical research on the geography of what this should be. Obviously, whatever it was called, Technopolis, had grown dust on the shelves for 15 years, so it didn't have a lot of traction, so that needed to be kind of re-looked at. And we have some legal work that needs to be done in terms of what are the powers in the state constitution, Chapter 353, which is a unique redevelopment tool that actually helped build BJC and kept BJC in the whole Central West End would not have happened without that. What Dick Roloff and Dr. Danforth and their counterparts back then did to keep the largest employer in the state in the city.
So what was resolved at that first
Resolved at that meeting was, as I recall, was to raise $125,000, and the hat was passed, and each of us, we were little players at RCGA, and we put in, I don't know, we had put in $250,000 or half of $250,000 for the Battelle study. We put a little bit in, but the principals put in most of it. Development Strategies was engaged, and the Stoller Partnership was engaged to do the sort of real estate geography and the legal research. And in a relatively short period of time, maybe 60 days, I'm guessing, there was a game plan that Dr. Danforth reconvened the group. I think it was again in Steve Lipstein's office, and said, there's an opportunity here. Here's what it would do. It was sort of like being in the National Football League when they were forming themselves and how they would have draft rights of players, because each of the universities had their own geographic needs of expansion and so on, and those had to be reconciled and accommodated in the context of this, what could be as large as 200-acre district that became Cortex. And it was a brilliant strategy. That
they looked at a few different places, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. And the idea was, how do we protect the opportunity for this to happen? Not that it's going to happen overnight. How do we protect the opportunity for this to happen? We also had, as I recall, and this is a credit to John Dubinsky and Louis Levy, we had a firm called Stereotaxis, which had grown from 2 to 102 people at the Center for Emerging Technologies, and everybody and their brother was trying to recruit them to San Diego and Boston and Research Triangle, and they gave a ultimatum to St. Louis that said, unless you find the specialized space for us, we're going to have to leave St. Louis, even though we love you and we've grown up here. And it was in that context that Cortex was beginning to happen. And so not only did the principals come up with a proportional share of what was about $30 million of capital to essentially land bank key parcels that we knew from a physical planning standpoint and a research district standpoint would be key, and to make those compatible with SLU and the Garden and WashU and BJC, who were also having expansion plans in the future. But we had this immediate need that John Dubinsky took on and called his high school buddy Louis Levy, who most people don't realize, Louis ran one of the top commercial real estate development companies in the country. John and Louis, purely as volunteers, before there was even, I guess Cortex became an it, but there was no staff for several years. John and Louis were volunteers who were the virtual staff. And Cortex 1, a 220,000 square foot building, got designed and built in time to keep Stereotaxis. Dr. Wrighton, you should ask him about this, came in with a critical both leasing of space and, I believe, a guarantee of the loan. Otherwise, we would have lost a major emerging company, and we would not have had the first physical manifestation of Cortex, which is Cortex 1 on Forest Parkway. And that grew out of those two meetings to create Cortex. And for the first, I'd say 2 to 3 years, it was volunteer driven. Representatives of the principals were from each of those institutions constituted the board. RCGA and Civic Progress were civic members of the board. And ultimately, the good fortune of St. Louis, Cortex was able to recruit a full-time CEO in Dennis Lauer, who had not only relevant experience, but he'd been a Presbyterian minister, so that helped a little too. But he had done life sciences development in Louisiana. And for the last, I'm guessing, how many years? 7, 5, whatever. Dennis has been the CEO of Cortex and recruited IKEA and recruited CIC, and he's done a fabulous job.